You want to swing wildly at the internet like you've got the new pill in your hand, but you keep getting dead battered. Find the movement you want with NordVPN. They are our protection against terrifying cyber threats and wide-battered geo-blocks. NordVPN will help you get through any rights restrictions so you can watch all the cricket you want. We aren't always happy with the wickets we're on. Sometimes we need a change. NordVPN can switch your virtual location so your IP address is ready to cash in. So if you need to get around the internet's rules, or I suppose in our case laws, select NordVPN. They can help you watch a game on a cheaper stream in another country. Give NordVPN the ball and let them penetrate all your vast internet issues. Because if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You can also receive a 20-gigabyte daily data voucher. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a big hitter is coming for you at nordvpn.com/KIMBER right now.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 34 of the Crickpicks podcast. I'm Behram and with me I have Estelle Vasudevan to my right, I think, on screen or left. And on the other side, we have Jarrod Kimber. You can find me at Def Mango on Twitter, Estelle at Estelle_Vasudev, the number 1. And Jarrod, you can find literally everywhere at Jarrod Kimber. And if you aren't familiar with Crickpicks, what we do on this show is that we take any generic cricket category and we draft our top 5 for that category in a snake-style draft competition. So that means that the order of picks goes 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. And the topic for this particular Crickpicks episode is the best retired test openers in history. Jarrod Kimber, no, actually not Jarrod, Estelle Vasudevan has pick number 1, so let's take it away.
Can't wait for a 90s pick.
I'm going with Sunny
Matthew
Gavaskar.
Hayden.
No, I'm going with
Gavaskar.
Sunny Gavaskar at number 1, nearly 10,000 runs at an average of 50 plus, and also the era in which he played, right? I think it's very difficult as a fan who kind of grew up later to understand the impact that he had, because a lot of what you hear is about his slow innings in limited overs cricket. But as a test opener, his record speaks for itself, right?
Yeah, 51.12. That's a high average.
He gets a lot of credit for what he did against the West Indies, but he didn't really make runs against the full-strength West Indies all that much. He didn't play against them all that much either. But everything else he doesn't get enough credit for. He's an absolutely fantastic player, and he's a player who got better as the wicket got older. So if you look at his record, he was really, really good when it got tough. And I think one of his greatest innings was his last innings ever against Pakistan, where he almost won a test for India on his own. I think he's a very underrated player. Partly, I think the one-day thing that Estelle mentioned, especially in India, is one-day cricket became so important. People laughed at what he did before, and he was actually a fine one-day player. It was just that first innings where he was like, this is nonsense. And then, of course, Sachin comes after him, and Dravid comes after him, and then, you know, Kohli and Rohit Sharma and all these different guys. I think some of that has taken off his shine, but yeah, he wasn't number 1 for me, but he wasn't far off.
He was the first player to breach the 10,000 run barrier, was it? Or was there someone else before him? I think he was the first one.
No, because I think Border was second, so I'm pretty sure. I mean, Gavaskar was before him.
And when I was looking at the numbers for all these retired test openers, very few averaged over 50, and Gavaskar was one of them, and he averages 51.12. So I mean, I feel like he definitely deserved to be a top 3 pick, if not number 1.
Yeah, I mean, it probably just depends on you know, it's a tricky one with openers, because I think probably openers in Australia and India, those specific countries maybe have slightly better records just because those are easier places to open than, you know, if you live in New Zealand. There isn't going to be, spoiler alert, there isn't going to be any New Zealanders on this list because there just aren't great New Zealand openers. So I think you have to factor that in a little bit. But he still averaged over 40 in the UK. So it's not like he has a hole in any of his, you know, places. And I think he averaged over 50 in places like Australia as well. Never played in Sri Lanka. Never played in South Africa. But so he made runs everywhere as an opener, and I don't think you can ask for much more than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Sunny Gavaskar pick number 1, and now Jarrod Kimber has his pick. Let's see what he says.
I am going to go Jack Hobbs.
Yeah, I actually, you know, when I was doing my research, that was my guess. I was like, Jarrod is going to go Jack Hobbs number 1, 100%.
Yeah, I think there isn't that much between Jack Hobbs. There's another opener as well, Anselmo Gavaska. But the fact that Jack Hobbs had such a long and ridiculous career, and also, was probably had become the best batter in the world, and then the World War happens, and he has to come back after the World War, and then he plays in a completely different era after World War One as well, which is, I think, very interesting. But also, we don't know how many first-class hundreds he made, 197 or 199. So if you think about the sheer amount of effort he did in that, but he was almost as good as Bradman compared to everyone else in that first era, before World War One. So when averages were quite low, he was still averaging over 50. And then in the second era, he was right up there in that period with all the other great batters still, and did that over a huge amount of time and all sorts of things. So yeah, he's an easy one for me.
Yeah, I think that's quite straightforward. Eek will be really happy with that pick because I think he was reading the book that Jack Hobbs wrote on how to hit or score a test century, something around those lines.
It's very important that we know that I don't make any decisions based on cricket as my son likes.
Yeah. All right. So I've got 2 picks now. And pick number 1 for me will be Matty Hayden. If not Estelle, I'll go that direction. And I feel like he's another one of those, giant left-handed test cricket openers who scored more than 50, averaged more than 50.73 is it? 8,625 runs. Also scored that 380 versus Zimbabwe. So that's the most runs ever by an opener in a single innings in test cricket. He's got that going for him. Big, strong guy who was also very good overseas, and his record in India in particular is very impressive, right? He's scored 1,027 runs at an average of 51.35 in India. And for an Australian opener to do that is mad impressive. He was one of my favorite players growing up. I absolutely loved to watch him bat. And the drop-off was instant, and then he retired. So a good chunk of his career was just him performing, in his peak.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing with Hayden is when he was rubbish, he couldn't get in the side. Whereas if you compare him to some of the other great openers, they were in the side all the way through. So I do think he basically had an incredible, 7 or 8 year run. Look, his numbers overseas are quite interesting because, he averages over 50 in India, but I think the majority of that is one series. And then I think he didn't do particularly well in the other series when he went back. Never made runs in England when the ball was moving around all that much, and was even worse in New Zealand when the ball was moving around. I wouldn't have had him this high, but I think most modern fans would probably have him pretty high. Estelle would have had him at number 2.
He did play 103 test matches as well. So
he did. But I think there's a bit of Mike Hussey treatment in his record of, if you don't play when you're not very good, your overall average is going to look a lot better. Whereas if you play all the way through and you have to, if he had to develop in his 20s in test cricket, I think he probably averages 3 or 4 less. And where is he on your list then? Even though he would have made more runs. That's the payoff. The difference between him and Alistair Cook, when you look at the overall records, is partly the fact that Alistair Cook played in England. And the other thing is that Alistair Cook started as a young player and finished as a 30-year-old player, like a normal career arc. And Hayden was very, very different. And as you said, there was a drop off there, and he left. And there's another player that I think is better than Matthew Hayden that might come up. Well, will definitely come up later.
Could be my next pick.
Yeah, and he did play on too long, and his overall numbers don't look as impressive as some of the other players.
Yeah, so I'm going to go for another modern great for pick number 2. Graeme Smith, 9,265 runs in 117 test matches at 48.25. And 48.25 is an extremely high average if you play your home cricket in South Africa. I reckon he would have touched 50 had it not been for Zaheer Khan in his life, because he would always get him out, right? That was a thing back in the day. And if you look at Smith's breakdown of averages in all the different countries that he played, it's only Sri Lanka and India where he averages, and Australia, where he averages below 40. Everywhere else, it's 40 plus. Some places, it's like ridiculously high. And Biff was the sort of cricketer, I think I've said this on another Crickpicks before, who would literally wear his heart on his sleeve and go out there, represent his country with the utmost pride. Broken wrist, not a problem. He's still going to go out there and bat. And in that particular era, the 2000s, I don't think that any other opener apart from Hayden. Then you've got Graeme Smith, and then there's one other guy whose name I won't drop. Those three guys were basically the best of the lot, and I used to really enjoy him, like playing him, watch him bat. I felt like his shots down the ground were really exquisite, and he was someone who was, a focal point of that extremely successful South African cricket team because he was captain as well.
Here's my favorite thing about him. You say that he would have averaged more if he didn't play in South Africa, which is probably true. If he just has a normal average in South Africa, so he averages 45, he would have averaged over 50 as an opener and be remembered much more as a batter than he probably was. So I always find that really fascinating. So he only averages like 41 at home, right? And I don't think there's going to be many guys on this list that are going to average 41 at home, right? Like generally that's where you make your runs. So I've always thought he's massively underrated. Again, I think you probably put him a little bit too high overall, but he's a fantastic cricketer.
I've left the guy who Sobers, the record that Sobers broke. I know there's that guy in there, but I've left him for you because I know you'll be able to talk to him much better.
No. I just figured that like the more sort of late 90s to early 2000s players you could take, the more that Estelle's heart breaks, that you can't jam them into her side.
Yeah.
So
that also works.
I figured you did it for that. My next player is Len Hutton.
Yeah.
Who averaged 57 as an opening batter. I think he, as someone who has lost an inch off my arm as well, he was a great test batter before World War II. Obviously, then has to slightly change the way he bats a little bit afterwards. Although, to be fair, I don't think my batting style's changed all that much. But it was always mentioned that he lost an inch. I think if you're a professional athlete and your arm is shorter afterwards, it's probably tougher, right? So, just an incredible player. Maybe not the sexiest one to watch, but I don't think you could kind of get the ball past him. So I'd say that's a really easy one for me, Len Hutton.
So he was on my list and he was high up there as well, but I can't talk to Len Hutton as good as you can. So I left him for you and I took Graeme Smith.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, me and Len Hutton as the 1 inch off our arms club. I think his is the left arm, which I think is probably better than mine if you're a right-handed batter. I'm not sure. Any scientist can call in and say which inch should your arm shorten on which side.
And his records stayed there for a while, didn't it? 360 or 350 something? I can't remember what his high score was.
He was 364, wasn't he?
Oh, was it? So Sobers beat his record by a run.
Yeah, so Sobers went past his record. So, look, I think also coming on the back of Bradman, if World War II doesn't happen and we get more of Hutton, so Hutton ends up with not that many career runs. Like, it's not like he made, 1 billion runs or anything in Test cricket, partly because he missed so many years. Be interesting to see where he would be rated now if he still averaged high 50s as an opener who played, into the 40s and 50s.
I mean, it's 79 tests and it's just a touch under 7,000 runs. So it's not nothing either, right?
No. But if you take out the 6 years that he didn't play, he might have been the first guy to break 10,000 runs, right?
True.
And when people talk about the greatest batters of all time, Hutton is sort of tier 2 when people discuss it. And a lot of that is on the fact that he probably missed quite a few years of his peak.
Yeah. Okay.
He was going to be my next pick, surprisingly.
Good.
How many of your next picks have we already taken, Estelle?
I had Graeme Smith as well. So 2.
Okay.
Okay, so I have 2 picks now. I'll go with two guys from the more modern era. One, Virendra Sehwag. Just the impact he had at the top of the order with the way he played, right? The way he took on the bowlers. And you would expect someone like that to not have like the massive scores, but his averages across the board, I mean, he's averaging 45 plus in Australia, right? Not a great record in England, but just the way he could take games away from teams, just made him such a valuable asset to an Indian team that was already pretty stacked, but he was kind of a unique player in the fact that he could quickly change a game, right, within a session.
Yeah, absolutely. His strike rate was 82.23 in Test cricket. The only caveat with Sehwag, because there's not many, he has 8,500 plus runs and he averages almost 50, which is spectacular for an opener. And when I was talking about the 2000s and how a third name might pop up, Sehwag was that guy. The reason I had him below Hayden and Graeme Smith was because his record is quite shoddy in England, New Zealand, and South Africa. Australia, it's good. I agree. It's spectacular. But apart from that, the other three SENA nations, he has done quite poorly, which is the only reason why he's below those two. Otherwise, he's still very high up my list.
It's
South
quite
Africa
interesting.
record is 50. I mean, average is 50 plus, right?
Is
Am
it?
I looking at the wrong thing? Yeah.
You're looking at the wrong thing.
Am I? Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
wrong player.
Yeah.
She's looking at the wrong player. I love that. I was thinking maybe she's looking at strike rate. It's like, no, I'm looking
No.
at a completely different player.
He averages 20 in New Zealand, 27.8 in England, and 25.46 in
25,
South
yeah.
Africa. So that's why I had him below those other two guys.
Yeah, I mean, Hayden's not particularly good in some of those places either. The interesting thing is, when I did my research into attacking openers, almost all the greatest attacking openers of all time really struggle when the ball's moving sideways. So even if, if you go back all the way, there's that we've ever had, the minute, whether it's Hayden or Sehwag or the other ones who might come up on this list later, they just struggle when the ball starts darting around. So it's a very normal thing. If you're going to be an attacking opener, you're probably going to make runs on, Asian decks, on Australian decks, on West Indian decks, and you're going to struggle the minute the ball starts to move sideways. So I don't think Sehwag's record is any more weird than, say, Hayden's is. And I would say that, I would probably have Sehwag slightly above him, but there's not much between them, really.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that one was expected. I have another guess for Estelle's pick number 3. Let's see if she takes that name.
Okay. I'm going with Chris Gale.
She did not take that name.
Similar to Sehwag, I think just the way he played the game meant that, a decision could be turned towards West Indies within a session, right? The way he batted. And I think because of his exploits in white ball cricket, his test career is very much underrated, but he's got a good record overall. Averaging 49. I am looking at the right player right now. Yes.
He averaged 49.88 in Australia.
67 in New Zealand, 54 in South Africa. And I think the Indian record is the only one that is like below 30. So generally has made runs all around the world.
Yeah, I think the issue with him is, I'm with you. I think he's a massively underrated test player. But the issue with him is really more to do with the fact that he never really they never really averaged a high amount overall. And again, the Graeme Smith thing comes in here. He averages 41, I think, in the West Indies. If he cashed in a little bit more at home, his overall numbers would be a lot better. I think this is a reach. I think there's a couple of openers that are probably I think there might be an opener from the West Indies that you might have slightly jumped ahead of Chris Gale. I think Chris Gale would be quite excited to be ahead of that other opener. But I do think overall his record is slept on quite a bit in Test cricket. It's interesting to see that he's gone in this list before some far more famous openers.
It was interesting because, but I like it. I like the rogue pick because he was on my long list, but wasn't probably going to be my third pick. You can't discount the fact that he has 2 Test triple hundreds, right?
No.
Yeah, so you've got that at least with Chris Gale.
And that's not that common for openers either. It's worth saying that triple hundreds specifically is probably more a middle order thing than a top order thing.
And also, she's gone for Sehwag and Gale. So you see a trend over here with Estelle in these picks. She's gone for high octane openers who whack it.
No, I like that. All right, let's pick the actual best opener from the West Indies, and let's go with Gordon Greenidge. I think Gordon Greenidge is incredible. For those who don't know, he was an attacking player in an era where people didn't really attack opening the batting, and he could also defend for hours on end. So he grew up he was born in the West Indies, born in Barbados, and then moved to England. And he was kind of a combination of both batting styles. And then early on in his career, he also went to World Series cricket. So he really was a very well-rounded player, and he's probably the one attacking player, attacking opener who could also handle the ball moving sideways. So you could almost have him higher than some of these other players. But he was the one I was talking about before, when the last couple of years of his career he plays on, and I think his average drops from above 50 to below 50 just because he keeps playing on. And it's a real shame because he could have had an absolutely incredible record, but and because of his average now, I don't know, is it 44, 45? I can't even remember.
44.72, so he slipped quite a lot.
Yeah, and so I think that if you look at his overall numbers and how good he was for a long period of time, and most people from that era would have had him on a similar level to Gavaskar, but with the ability to attack. And so he basically, he averages, where is it? 83, 84, and 85. He averages over 60, 58, and 53, right? And then after that, he averages in the 30s almost every year and in the 20s some years. And so he just plays on too long. But for a long period of time, he was absolutely dominant and a brilliant player. And obviously, probably, and I would put him and Sanal Gavaskar in the list of two of the best fourth innings players of all time.
Interesting. Yeah, 7,558 runs in 108 test matches. So even if that average dropped to just under 45, it still looks spectacular, right? For people who don't even know that context, they're probably going to open that Cricinfo page and be quite impressed. And I haven't watched Gordon Greenidge, bat live. Of course, I wasn't born then. But my uncles and my father, everyone who I've ever heard or speak of him, they are
it's popular
full of
with
praise.
the uncles. Yeah, big with the uncles, Gordon Greenidge.
That West Indian team, and then the two names that you hear most in the batting department are Viv Richards and Gordon Greenidge. Those are two that stand out. So, I'm not surprised that he's made it. Thank you for leaving the more vanilla picks for me, Jarrod. I'm going to go and take them. So, there's been a trend with my two picks thus far. If you guys have noticed, I have two southpaws in Matty Hayden and Graeme Smith. And I'm going to keep that trend alive with two more. The first of which is Alistair Cook. 12,472 runs in 161 test matches at 45.35. And if you look at Cook's record, it's just South Africa and New Zealand where he struggles. Everywhere else, he has runs. A fantastic player of spin. Did really, really well in Asia because of that. And also someone who had to play his home cricket in England, right? So that average of 45 is better than what it may seem. And, someone who I felt also could have gone on a little longer. He retired at an interesting time. I think he scored a ton in his final test match as well.
He might have retired at a very good time because it was the point. He basically retires when everyone works out how to bowl the wobble ball.
Yeah, also fair.
It's a really interesting thing whether he would have handled that or if he actually left at the perfect time. Because he does play in a brilliant batting era. And just as it's getting tricky, he's like, anyway, I'm going to go off and make a lot of runs for Essex. And probably was still the best opener in England. So I think it's fascinating. I do think he's underrated. I was talking to a former great recently, and he was asking me, he was picking my brain on where some of the players were in my book. And I was telling him that, Alistair Cook was in the top 50. He's like, no, I can't be. And I was like, but he made runs everywhere for ages at a time when no other openers were really doing all that much, especially away from home. How do you not rate that? But a lot of people are just like, no, it's boring. I'm like, I don't disagree that he was boring. I had to watch a great deal of those 12,000 runs. And, I remember 7 or 8 of his shots.
Yeah. The sweeps are there and then the full blade that comes down, the track and he just kind of nudges it for 4. That's a very iconic Alistair Cook shot. That's one of the first shots that comes to my mind. But, is he the 5th or 6th highest run scorer of all time in the format? I think he's 5th highest run scorer in Test cricket. So you can't discredit that. And it was a 12-year career. Sure, England plays so many Test matches that he ended up with 161. But to his credit, he maintained a 45-plus average across 161 Test matches as an opener. So I think he is...
And started very young as well.
Yes.
Which is worth remembering.
Also, first innings, he did really well, wasn't it? First Test match at least. Was it Nagpur? Something like that. He was playing in India. That I remember. So he was pick number 3.
Nagpur was Joe Root.
Yes, Nagpur was Joe Root. But
I do think Alistair Cook did well early on because I've got a story about this. A friend of mine called Manny, who used to work on Test Match Sofa, he watched Alistair Cook, I think it was in his first innings, and went straight down to the local bookmaker and asked what was the what were the odds he could get on Alistair Cook making 30
It is
test
Nagpur.
hundreds?
Jarrod, I checked. It's Nagpur.
Oh, it was Nagpur. Oh, they were both
Yeah.
at Nagpur. Sorry. Yeah, and he went and asked, and he said, what are the odds of Alistair Cook making 30 test hundreds? I think it was 30 test hundreds or 20 test hundreds, whatever it was, and ended up. He had to wait quite a while, but he made quite a bit of money off that.
I'm just going to check real quick how much he scored in that test match because I have this memory. Yeah, so he scored 60 in his debut innings and then he scored 104 not out. So I had, memory did serve me correct. Alistair Cook killed it.
So should all England batters debut in Nagpur based on Alistair Cook and Joe Root?
The two highest scorers for England in test history both debuted in Nagpur. Wow, that's a fun one. Okay, so...
And there's nothing else fun about Nagpur.
Yeah, there are a few left-handers who I could have gone with, but I'm going to go with Saeed Anwar for pick number 4.
Oh my God.
And it's interesting because he doesn't have an awful lot of runs, right? 4,052 in 55 test matches. His average is 45.52. But if you actually look closer at Saeed's record, his away record is fantastic. Most of his runs actually come away from home, which is very, very unique for a batter from the subcontinent. You don't really get to see that very frequently. And, Australia, or in Australia, he averages 47. In England, he averages 42.3. In India, he averages 57.8. In New Zealand, he averages 52.2. And South Africa as well is 34.14. So, and Sri Lanka also, throw that in there because he played a really, really good Sri Lankan team, right? 74.33. So I feel like those away numbers really elevate him in at least my eyes. And I remember, Jarrod, when we were discussing your top 50 batters book, he wasn't that far off from making it to that list, was he?
No, a lot of it is he just didn't make a lot of runs, right?
Yeah.
And also he was dropped in his career. Like, I think he played a test early on and then didn't play for like 2 or 3 years afterwards. And then again, he had, I mean, it's Pakistan, so who knows? He could have been dropped for, anything smiling weirdly at the breakfast table. But because of that, he just didn't play enough games to really force his way into that list. Whereas I think he's a really interesting one because I wonder how much worse he is than someone like Gale or Sehwag or Hayden, just because of his ability to be consistent everywhere. And make runs in so many different places. So even if he has a lower average than Hayden or Sehwag, but it's just for a modern cricketer, it's not a lot of runs.
Yeah, no, there's no argument over there. 4,000 something runs aren't a lot, but I just felt like that, that rap sheet that he has or resume, it really does stand out for a batter in the subcontinent. And I was looking for away form as well. So he was also spectacular to watch, one of the great drivers of the ball and a flair player. So a lot of people are going to slag me off in the comments for picking Saeed Anwar because I'm from Pakistan, but I don't care. He is my pick number 4.
Yeah, he wasn't on my long list, but he's not far away from my long list as well. So I don't think it's a terrible pick. He's just, unfortunately, as I said, he's just got holes in his career that had nothing to do with him. Let's make this easy. Herbert Sutcliffe.
Which one?
Not Bert Sutcliffe, Herbert Sutcliffe. Although Bert Sutcliffe was a good player too, but not just an opener. Herbert Sutcliffe is kind of forgotten because at the other end, the greatest batter who had ever lived at that point was his opening partner. And he completely dominated Jack Hobbs. When you have a look, I think I looked at this recently. In the matches that they played, Herbert Sutcliffe averaged like 10 more than Jack Hobbs.
Wow.
In those games. Now, Jack Hobbs was 83 years old and probably the 197 or 199 hundreds had slowed down a little bit by that point. But, I think Herbert Sutcliffe is really interesting because he's kind of sandwiched between Hobbs and Bradman. If you think about it, his career, he starts playing with Hobbs and then just as he becomes the best batter in the world, Bradman comes along. And so he just gets forgotten. He didn't have a long career. I think it's very much a similar sort of situation as maybe someone like Hayden or even Saeed Anwar, where perhaps over a longer period of time, more things would have happened. But he averages, 60 opening the batting in Test cricket, essentially. So it's hard not to have him on any particular list. And there's one other great thing about Herbert Sutcliffe. There's so many great photos of Herbert Sutcliffe out there because he's got this sort of weird serial killer vibe. And I don't know if you've so okay. I started this on Instagram during lockdown, and then I got a little bit bored. But there are so many photos of him that you can just put up as serial killer or cricketer.
Definitely serial killer vibes. I've just seen the photo, and oh my god,
they always pick serial killer. And there's a great photo of him with like I don't know what it is. It's like a possum on his shoulder,
okay,
and it makes him look like a fucking Bond villain. So if you can look it up, it's on his Wikipedia page for anyone who's out there. Herbert Sutcliffe. It's in the first photo of him on Wikipedia. Is literally him in this with this weird serial killer glaze in his eyes, and then a fucking possum on his shoulder. And I'm sorry, I think it's these sorts of things that may have actually affected his career.
Let me check this possum picture because now I'm really intrigued.
I mean, what is it, Estelle? It's a weird animal to have on your shoulder. Is it? It's like, it looks like a hairy ferret.
What is this animal?
I don't know.
It looks like a bush baby. I don't know.
I don't know what a bush baby is.
I have no idea that was even an animal. Maybe it's like a quokka. Is that how you pronounce it?
I don't think it's a quokka. It doesn't look. I mean, it looks like an Australian possum. But I don't know if it is, and I don't know where he is at the time. All I know is, despite the fact he has this animal on his shoulder, he looks like he doesn't realize the animal's on his shoulder, which is the creepiest thing of that photo. And also, who picked that as his photo for Wikipedia? And I think that just tells you how many weird images there are of Herbert Sutcliffe. Because you look at some of the others. There's the one that I think it might be on his Crick Info profile, where he is literally peering into your soul. In that one, it is,
and he's
so full on.
He's averaging 60.73 in 54 Test matches, so he was peering into bowlers' souls as well.
Exactly. Yeah, he was a pretty handy cricketer.
Yeah. Okay, Estelle is finishing up then.
I was going to pick him next, and that's the exact thought I had when I saw his picture because it was like creepy.
Yeah, so just the hairs on the back of your neck just go up for a second, don't they, once you've seen him?
I had both Len Hutton and Herbert Sutcliffe as well, but then I just want Jarrod to pick them as well, and that gives me an opportunity to talk about players who I know more about. So that's been my strategy for this one.
I'm just trying not to get slagged off by making a weird pick. So let's go with the next one. I have two, right?
Yes,
you've got two. Yeah, you're finishing up.
Jeffrey Boycott.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So he's got a good record overall. I don't think he's played a lot of cricket in the subcontinent. So that is one thing to take into consideration. But I mean, averaging 47 in Australia, 57 in India, but just 13 tests there, 84 in Pakistan. I think South Africa is the only one where he's got a low average. And he's very different from the two I picked in my previous chance, where he's not that aggressive batter, right? But I think in the era he played and just the way the contributions he made, he has to be considered among at least the top 15, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of glad you picked him so I didn't have to. But look, I think you said he struggled in South Africa. I think he made runs in South Africa as well. I think the only place from memory he doesn't make runs is New Zealand, which is random for an English opener. But Alistair Cook has that in his career as well. So I don't know if the ball swings in a different way over there or seams in a different way and they struggle with it. But look, he was a fantastic player. Clearly, he has issues with the fact that he ran out many of his teammates. So his average is built on that. He was, by his own teammates' admission, maybe the most selfish player in the history of cricket. Tony Greig always said that he ducked fast bowlers and didn't quite go up against the fastest bowlers in the world. There's a little bit of truth in that, but I'm pretty sure he made 100 against Andy Roberts, say in a I think it was a Gillette Cup game or something of those lines. But there's no doubt that he played for himself in a way that Gavaskar gets that a little bit, but Gavaskar is not even close to the level of Boycott. Boycott was almost a singular being in the way that he batted. But purely as a technician, as an opening batter, it was very hard to get the ball past him. And the other thing is, I think I'm right in saying this, that when he made, what did he make? He made 22 Test hundreds. And those 22 Test hundreds, England never lost a game that he made 100 in. But 12 of his Test hundreds are in draws, right? So, but again, that's because he batted slow, and I think we can understand that. But they didn't. If he made 100, England weren't going to lose a game. That's a pretty good record to have as a player, I would have thought.
Yeah, no, and 8,114 runs is a lot of runs to score in 108 Test matches.
And he had a three-year hiatus for whatever reason that was.
Average is like a smidgen under 48. It's 47.72, which is very, very high for an opening batter in England. So sure, he might have boycotted his team and would play for himself, but that's still, those numbers are really impressive.
Yeah, and it's slightly more controversial off the field, Estelle.
Yeah.
I see you've dodged all those things about boycott.
Some things are better left unsaid.
Yeah, exactly. My last pick. Okay. I'm going with... Yeah, I'm going with Mark Taylor.
Oh, okay. Phew, I thought... Okay, that's okay.
Who did you think I was going to pick?
I don't know. I just thought you were going to make a huge error because you've got quite an interesting team. But Mark Taylor, go.
Yeah, so Mark Taylor, again, one of those gritty kind of opening batters. Not one of the prettier batters to watch, but he just got the job done, didn't he? I mean, just when kind of you can say he was at the kind of the beginning of the Australian golden era type period. Runs everywhere around the world. Not huge records. So, like, if you look at the previous players that we picked, some of them have like massively good records in certain countries. I think he's generally been around that 40-45 mark in most countries. So I feel like that paints a picture that he's been consistent throughout his career.
So it's funny that you call him consistent throughout his career, because I was about to say the exact opposite. He's sort of consistent everywhere, but I don't know if you know this. He averaged 50. He was still averaging 50 after 32 tests, right? And the rest of his career is a bit of a shit show, and he ends up with an average of 43.49. But in the middle of that, towards the end of that, he makes 334 not out.
Yeah.
And if he'd not made that, he probably would have finished his career averaging maybe 39-40.
Ooh.
Right? It's a really fascinating career, because if you watched him early on, it looked like he was going to go on to be one of the best batters in the world. And I don't know what the situation was, whether international players just worked him out, because you could actually keep him quiet a bit, and he had a bit of problem with balance sometimes and all sorts of things. But for a long period of time, it's like he just didn't make any runs in Test cricket, and it's a really fascinating case study. And I haven't heard him talk about you know what it's like when you can imagine in Australia what it was like when the Test captain didn't make runs for like 4 years, and it just kept going on and on. But I think it had started well before then. So it'd be interesting to know if he feels like he was worked out by players, or sort of what the situation was. But from like 1993 onwards, he just doesn't make really any runs. Up until that point, he's probably looking like he's going to end up as a top 5 player of all time on this list. So it's a really interesting selection from Estelle from that point of view. But he certainly could make runs in Asia, and was brilliant in England. And you kind of take those two as a pretty good starting block, right?
Yeah. W. Taylor was on my long list, but he was below another Australian cricketer or opener. So let's see if Jarrod picks that guy.
I'm definitely not going to pick that guy. This one's a bit interesting at this point, because I think most of my list is now gone. And then there's 2 guys who don't play a lot of Test cricket, and another Australian opener who's probably not on Behram's list. Let's just be simple. I don't know why I'm just going to go old fellas on this one, but I'm going to go Victor Trumper.
Okay.
If you look at Victor Trumper's average now, it looks ridiculous. But you have to remember that he played in sort of the end of the uncovered, or not uncovered, the end of the unrolled pitches, or the cow shit pitches, if you will, little chunks of turds on them. And we know, I think he has a strike rate of around 70 in a period where basically players couldn't score at all. I think he had the 3rd best average of his era. The only thing that holds me back on him as an opener is that he's probably a better batter when he batted in the middle order. But as an opener, I think he has a strike rate the same as Vrinder Sehwag 100 years before. And his ability to be the 3rd best batter on average and have a strike rate of Vrinder Sehwag's at that point, I think there's I think there's holes within his career, even a short career, that we don't have a lot to talk about. But he was the player who opened up the leg side for cricket. And he was the guy that was like, oh, you're going to bowl outside off stump. That's fine. I'm going to whip you over mid-wicket because I don't care and I'm better than you. And those are the sorts of things that I'm here for. So Victor Trumper, I'll pop him in on the end of my list.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. It's poetic justice, how much you've loved Victor Trumper over the years and how frequently he appears in your work. I've probably heard the name like 50,000 times in the last year and a half. So I'm very happy that you picked him and you left.
I think Gideon Haig's cat was called Victor Trumper, by the way.
Interesting. Yeah, so someone who was far ahead of his time, and we recently did an Afridi podcast. His name popped up in that one as well. I'm going to take the Australian opener that you didn't want to. And I'm sure Estelle had him on her list. I would be surprised if she didn't. She didn't. Wow. Anyway, I'm just going to continue my left-hander streak and end with 5 southpaws. I'm going to pick JL, Justin Langer. 7,696 runs in 105 test matches at 45.27. Yes, his record in India and South Africa and even Sri Lanka is quite terrible, but he got lots of runs in England and his average in England is 55.11. Well, it's not lots of runs, it's roughly 500, but that's still a really, really impressive average. And then he's also done really well in New Zealand and Pakistan. In Australia, he has 48.65 or averages 48.65. Interesting little nugget about JL is that he played quite a few test matches at first drop, 38 to be exact. And over there, his average is 41.64. So had he not played at number 3, he might have averaged over 50 as an opener.
Yeah, he was an accidental opener, right? Slater went off it, physically and mentally, and they just had to pick someone else, and Langer took the job. He kind of, I remember watching him as a first drop, thinking he kind of always batted like an opener. He almost averages 50 as an opener, so I don't think there's a problem with him being on this list. But you're right, his runs are kind of in a few areas rather than consistent everywhere. And outside of England, but having said that, like England and New Zealand, he handled the sideways moving ball in a way that most Australian batters don't. Yeah. Right. So there's some interesting parts of his record, and probably his inability to play spin is that maybe the thing that held him back from going up a lot higher. I just don't think he was a particularly good player of spin overall, and that did cause him some issues. But he's a really interesting player. Him and Hayden both being in this list.
He was also the perfect foil to Hayden, right? Because he was dogged. He wasn't the free-flowing bat like Hayden was, and he would get you those tough runs. And I actually like that about JL. That was quite an admirable quality about him. And he was of that breed of Australian cricketers which would do absolutely anything to win and really,
take the bail off.
Take the bail off, exactly. And he had that sort of competitive spirit that, he would try to get under your skin and stuff like that. So that's very Justin Langer.
The whole, I always thought he had a really interesting style in that he played like a lot of club openers I've seen in Australian cricket where he would hit a bunch of 4s early on and they would take out the extra slips and then he would just block for hours. It's a really interesting, there were so many times he was scoring quicker than Hayden for about 15, 20 runs. And then Hayden would be 50 and JL would be 25. There was that element of him. All right, should we go through some that we haven't got on? It'd be interesting to see if there's any others. Bill Lawry, I think, is probably a better player than Justin Langer. I think a lot of Justin Langer's runs come in the very easy to bat period from 2001 to 2008. And you could throw Hayden in that one as well a little bit. I think Bill Lawry was a fantastic opening batter for a long period of time. His overall numbers take a bit of a dip, in part because he, towards the end of his career, captaincy just ruined him. And then he retired probably because he lost the captaincy. Whereas actually, if he'd come back as a batter, I'm sure he would have gone back to making runs again and wouldn't have had any issues. Barry Richards is someone that it's hard to put in because he only ever plays 4 test matches, but is probably a more talented opener than certainly than a lot of other players on this list, but we never got to see it because of South Africa's apartheid. And so it's hard to work out where to put him in. But I think those are 2 players. And if Bill Laurie's opening partner was Bob Simpson. Both of them have really weird records, Bob Simpson and Bill Laurie, when you really start to dig in. But there's no doubt that they at least need to be mentioned on this. And they were probably the first great partnership from Australia, and maybe the second great partnership after Hobbs and Sutcliffe.
I had some oldies in there as well, which obviously didn't make it because I think the 15 that we picked, maybe there's a rogue pick or two in there, but they're all fairly straightforward picks, I feel.
Who are your rogue ones?
No, my rogue pick was Said Anwar, and Estelle's rogue pick was Chris Gayle. So in my longer list for the oldies, I had Hanif Mohammed, Glenn Turner, and then I mean Desmond Haynes as well. I feel deserves a mention over here. Graham Gooch perhaps opened the batting for at times, and then you had you were saying.
No, I think there's a lot of people in England who have Graham Gooch really, really high. The problem is that his average is really low, but it's because in his 30s, he becomes the player he probably always should have been. And the one thing I would say about Graham Gooch, why you could definitely put him on this list ahead of probably Taylor, Trumper, Anwar and Langer, if you wanted to, would be that he was the best player against the West Indies fast bowlers. So I do think you could throw him back into that list based on that. But it's the overall numbers that are the issue with Gooch, because he didn't make any runs away from home at all.
That's a similar story with Athers. I feel like we all know that he could stick it out over there, but the numbers aren't very flattering. Strauss had a drop-off, but for a period in between, Strauss was phenomenal. I think Atapattu had a great run in between as well. I really liked him as a young cricket enthusiast. Gary Kirsten, maybe, could have made the list.
Gary Kirsten's an interesting one because we haven't mentioned him at all. When we were doing the list of our book, he was so high up for such a long time in the metrics that we did. But the more I delved into his career, the more I just felt like it didn't stand up as much. But I mean, you could make a very good case for Gary Kirsten probably in over Langer, I think, if you wanted to, pound for pound.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I loved Marcus Trescothick, so he was just there because I had this personal joy of watching him bat as a youngster as well. And then there were a few rogue ones in Gibbs and Sanath in my long list.
Mark Richardson is another one that I think is really interesting. Doesn't play for a long time, but is the greatest opener by average from New Zealand. And his career is so weird. It's always, there's no time when it's not worth mentioning Mark Richardson. Estelle, did you have any others?
Yeah, I pretty much had the same type of ones in the long list, like Graham Gooch, Mike Atherton. I had Sanath as well, but in comparison to the two attacking openers that I picked, I think they're clearly they clearly have the better record. But yeah, I think I got in some decent picks.
Just on Herschel Gibbs as well, he's another one like Langer that, if he just played as an opener, he has a fantastic record. But his overall record doesn't work as much. All right, let's have a look at these lists. Estelle, Sunil Gavaskar, Verinder Sehwag, Chris Gayle, Jeffrey Boycott, Mark Taylor. It's an interesting list to be picked by a women's cricket writer, that one, Estelle. Picks 3 and 4. I've gone Jack Hobbs, Len Hutton, Gordon Greenidge, Herb Sutcliffe, Victor Trumper. One of my players played in the colour era. Behram has gone Matthew Hayden, Graham Smith, Alistair Cook, Syed Anwar, Justin Langer. So all left-handers there. So tell us which ones you like, whether you would have had, someone like Herschel Gibbs or Gary Kirsten or Desmond Haynes. There's some Graham Gooch. There's some really good older players and some younger players that didn't, or newer players that didn't make it in. But yeah, that's it. That's our test openers, right?
Yeah, so do make sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Let us know who you think won this one, as you always do. And I have a good feeling about this one because my players are more recent than Jarrod's. And I feel like, the Hayden-Langer partnership might get me some love from Australia as well. But we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know.
Eventually.
You've got Smith and Cook, though, man. It's not sexy, yours, is it?
Yeah, it's not particular. Like, the sexy element is Syed Anwar. He's bringing that in.
Yeah, but no one's going to remember that. I think that's your issue there. It's possible that we might all lose this. But maybe that's just because we're talking about openers. By the way, just at the end, it's worth mentioning, I don't think we mentioned Warner at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
we
actually
did
thought
not.
that was Behram's second Australian pick.
Oh
I thought he
no,
was
I
gonna go for
actually,
Warner.
in my head, he's still not retired, and this was retired test openers, but he has actually retired, and George Bailey has made that very clear.
I think when I looked at the with the long list for the best 50 batters of all time, we had a list of about 85 batters, and he had the worst average of any player for 3,000 runs or 2,000 runs, whatever it was, away from home.
Yeah, so home track bully, and to the point where the numbers are inflated because of that, right? So, I mean, he wouldn't have made my long list either, probably, even if I had remembered that he is a retired cricketer now. But anyway, maybe some of you would have had Warner. Let us know if that was the case. And that is it for this episode of Crickpicks. We'll be back with another episode next week. You guys have a good one. Bye-bye.
If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.